What you call that noise?
The XTC Podcast.
XTClimelight.com.
What do you call that noise?
What do you call that noise?
Andy looked down at me in the middle of one of the lyrics and he just said, "Would you mind moving over just a little bit?"
I don't want to put it all on Andy because the rest of the band obviously contributed, but he was just this magnet. You didn't want to leave.
Those are the voices of Kathleen Hiraga and Tom Morley, both of whom have excellent tales to tell from the days when XTC were one of the most exciting live acts on the circuit. Hello there, I'm Mark Fisher, and in today's episode of What Do You Call That Noise, the XTC podcast, we're going to hear not one, but two fascinating interviews. The first is with Kathleen Hiraga, who in the early 1980s was a rock photographer in New York City, where she specialised in taking live shots of punk and post-punk bands, particularly those from Britain. She was in the right place to see The Clash, The Jam, Public Image Limited, The Beat and The Specials. And she was also a fan of XTC and pictured them at Hurrah in New York City on the 16th of January 1980, a gig that wound its way onto the Rhythm Bootleg album. On her website, she is selling copies of her favourite images of XTC. And then the second interview is with someone who saw XTC repeatedly before they were even signed. Tom Morley was the original drummer of Scritti Politti. It's his fine work you can hear on their debut album Songs to Remember, which is a bit of a classic. Along with his bandmates Green Gartside and Nial Jinks, who all lived in a Camden squat, he was a regular at XTC's gigs at the Rochester Castle pub venue in London in 1977, even before they were signed. To get us warmed up for that, let's begin with a listener-generated song. This is the section of the podcast where we hear a piece of music that has been inspired in some way by XTC. This month, it's the turn of Jean-Paul Vest of The Last Charge of the Light Horse, who will introduce Talk to the Hand.
What do you call that noise?
Hi, Mark. One of the things I love most about XTC's music is the attention that they pay to every element of a song. Not just their brilliant lyrics, but the rich variety of rhythms, the strong melodies, beautiful harmonies, interesting chord changes, and their arrangements, and the choice of instruments. You never hear the same thing twice. And I'm also impressed with the deftness at which they handle political and social commentary. Songs like Respectable Street, Living Through Another Cuba, This World Over, Books Are Burning. They'll tackle these very dark subjects sometimes and contrast them with a light and bouncy feel to the music that really highlights their point. And I just love the way they do that.
Classic case of deviant
What do you call that noise?
Thank you, John Paul. If you liked what you heard, you can find lots more of it on John Paul's website, which is at lastcharge.com. Quite an easy one, lastcharge.com. And if you've got an XTC-inspired song that you'd like the world to hear, do let me know at mark@xtclimelight.com. Hooray for Burning Shed. I'm proud to say that the online record shop is the sponsor of What Do You Call That Noise, the XTC podcast, and you can sign up for their weekly newsletter at burningshed.com, where you'll also find goodies from loads of artists, including Stephen Wilson, Jethro Tull, Billy Bragg, Pink Floyd, and Big Big Train. It is the only place to get official XTC merchandise, and they ship worldwide, and proceeds go to the band. Also helping keep the podcast going are the generous fans who have signed up to Patreon. Many thanks to all of them. If you like what you're listening to and would like to hear more of it, it'd be great if you'd consider joining them. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/Mark Fisher, and there are 3 levels of support. If you opt to be a knight in shining armor, I'll read out your name at the end of each episode. As well as the podcast, there is a book. What Do You Call That Noise? An XTC Discovery book, which offers a musician's eye view of the band. And you can buy it at xtclimelight.com, where you'll also find details of all these podcasts. Right, it's time for the interviews. First, we're going to go to Kathleen Hiraga, who will be remembering her days as a photographer on the New York punk and new wave scene in the early 1980s. And we'll segue neatly from that into Tom Morley, who will take us all the way back to Leeds Polytechnic when Scritti Politti formed, and the subsequent years in London seeing XTC in 1977. So I hope you enjoyed hearing these interviews as much as I did conducting them.
What do you call that noise?
I'm here with Kathleen Hiraga. Thank you very much for joining us, Kathleen. It's really good to see you and be with you. And you've got a very interesting story. We're going to be talking a lot about Hurrah and the occasion on which XTC appeared in 1980, I think for 3 nights running, and you were there as a photographer. But your whole background in music is interesting. And I think in particular, I'm particularly amused and impressed by your, because often you hear people saying, oh, it's often in newspaper interviews, they'll say, what was the first record you bought? And people are always a little bit embarrassed about the first thing. You've got the most fantastic first record ever story. Tell me what it is.
Well, I bought my very first record when I was 5 years old at Discount Records from Iggy Pop, then Jim Osterberg. And the first record was The Fifth Dimension, Up, Up and Away. We were struggling with a Mamas and Papas record with my brother, and I won. And I'm very happy I won.
And he was just the guy who worked at the record store?
Yep, he was one of the guys in the record store. I noticed that he was the one who was always standing behind the cash register with his arms folded, and he hated me. He hated children. He hated the record. He just didn't want to be there and sell. He was always in the back, usually, as I've read about, filing records and, inventory. But yeah, that was he really stood out. All of the, they were all students and they were very friendly, especially with a 5-year-old. But I turned to my mom and I said, he's really. So, yeah, that was the beginning.
So presumably it was later that you discovered that he was somebody, or he would be somebody.
Oh, yeah, not that long later. I mean, he was a fixture at all of these free concerts. MC5 and a band called Up, which was part of Sonic's Rendezvous at the time or later on. But these were like major hippie concerts, and I would just ride my bike around. I was, I think, 11 or 12. And so, yeah, it was a little bit scary. The hippie thing was so hardcore, but then you had the Ann Arbor Blues and Jazz Festival. So then, there was just so much music that was free all the time. So I was aware of him for sure, but I never saw him in like the full regalia. Still developing the look.
And although your early career was as a photographer, it sounds like music is really central. Was it music that caught your imagination first?
Oh yeah, I mean we were a very musical family. We all played instruments. We were in concert band, high school. As I was becoming a teenager and more aware of these massive stadium concerts, Fleetwood Mac and Bob Seger and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and it just went on and on. And so I'd write to the ticket master. It was not Ticketmaster. You had to get tickets somehow. I'd write, I'm 12 years old and I want to sit up in the front because I'm really small. And they give me really good tickets. But it became such a thing where these bands were just getting bigger, these dinosaur bands. And I just was starting to get really turned off by the huge production. And suddenly I remember the Sex Pistols. Now I was 15. And I remember that sort of horror of the media in America saying this is the worst band in Britain, the worst band ever. And I put their record on and I thought it was the best thing I had ever heard in my life. And that was the moment when I was just like, aha, this is what I want. This is what I really, I want it all stripped down. And I never went back to a Fleetwood Mac concert.
I never went back to Fleetwood Mac. That's funny. And if you, I'm just wondering then, because we've already been talking about Iggy Pop, whether you had some grounding in what would you call it, proto-punk music with the stuff that was coming out of your area of the world at the time.
Yeah, what happened is that there was a club called Second Chance, and it was right in the middle of Ann Arbor downtown. And there was a guy named John Carver. He's still alive, and he looks like somebody who's in a country club. He booked the Sex Pistols, and they pulled out, but he booked the Jam, early Billy Idol, early Ramones, Patti Smith 100 times because she was our house band. I mean, he booked everybody. And that was what led to me being able to see like weekly incredible bands. And it became sort of a tribe. And we all, as in Britain, we all gathered together, started knowing everyone. And my boyfriend at the time was a photographer. And one night he handed me his camera and said, just shoot. And I did. And that was sort of, I didn't shoot regularly. It was just one night. And I thought, this is fun. And they developed the film and I looked at it and I was like, okay, there are a couple shots in there. So that Second Chance was so important. Iggy never played there. But Sonic's Rendezvous played there all the time. And that was really the carryover of the hardcore Detroit, really gritty sound. And of course, Sonic's Rendezvous is an offshoot of the MC5. So I think what was nice is seeing these bands on a teeny tiny stage and the audience being so involved.
There's something else. I mean, there's all those you're a teenage, so there's all those hormones going through every teenager's body, and so there's an excitement that you respond to in that sort of music. But also politically, in those days, politics in America different to politics in the UK. But certainly from a UK perspective, punk felt like a reaction to increasing authoritarianism, to tensions within communities, with the young rebelling against the old, and so on. And that was something I think that you probably tuned into as well, was it?
Absolutely. I mean, there's something about that Sex Pistols album resonating because there was so much pushback and outrage in London. And then, of course, I loved the fashion. I mean, Vivienne Westwood and Malcolm. And, the fashion just became such a thing for me. I created sort of a caricature of myself when I left for New York and started shooting. And the name was Mona Simone. So I really tapped into the fashion in London and the outrage. It was just so much more interesting to me. And, it had an anchor. So when I saw the Jam just blowing up on the stage, or the Clash just, in this fury of energy, I just thought, God, this is so much more interesting. But politically, I did feel like I wasn't just shooting bands randomly. I was very much a part of that sensibility.
Yeah. And let's take a step back. So you went to New York for art school, and that was the point when you started developing your photography, was it?
Exactly. I was there for photography, and I looked the way I looked, which was great because at the time New York was, I was living on 12th and 3rd, and that was just down from St. Mark's. So it's like, I found my people. And Parsons was Parsons. So I used their dark room. I'd sneak in at night after I would shoot shows. The Palladium was on 12th. So it was literally, I could look out my window and see the Palladium. So I thought, well, this is a great opportunity. I've been in this music scene. I look the part. And so I snuck in one night. It was a sound check with the Police. And it was their first tour, big tour. Palladium's big. And it kind of started from there because I took Stuart Copeland's guest list and I wrote my name, Mona Simone, upside down. So then they were like, when people were getting in during the show, they were like, okay, here's a name. And I was the only photographer other than one that Miles had hired with a little 50 millimeter lens. And the woman came over to me and she said, how the hell did you get in here? And I ended up just being able to take some photos of the sound check, which I have published, of Sting just sitting there. And so that kind of started it. And I shot after that, I would just look at the Palladium schedule and shoot 2-3 bands a night. But I also looked at the Detroit schedule and I saw that the Clash were playing a tiny little place, Motor City Roller Rink. And then the Jam were playing a couple nights later. And I didn't have time to stick around for Iggy, but I should have. But it was like this weird, I think it was only 9 months somebody was booking. So that's, I was back and forth between Detroit and New York. I was just kind of following bands at that point.
It's amazing. Initially, was it just a combination of liking photography and liking music? Or at what point did you start selling your pictures? Or did it become a profession?
Well, I was obsessed with the bands. I knew about the bands more than just being a fan. I was really deep into into what they were doing. The Jam were doing different things than the Clash, PIL, certainly Johnny had a certain style of concert. So, I was shooting a lot and I was spending all my money that I had for art school on film. And my parents didn't know this. And so one night I bumped into Bob Gruen, who I didn't really know. And he started talking to me and he had seen me at shows. And one of the things that I was able to do that most photographers didn't do is I'd climb on anything. I was really small and I could climb up on amps. I'd get on ladders. I'd get on scaffolding. I always wanted to get a shot that was more behind the stage with the Clash or above, and then super underneath, framing the band so it wasn't just like a portrait shot. And Bob looked at me and he said, "Who are you?" And I said, I'm just a fan and I'm shooting a lot and I'm selling to, Circus and Cream and Hit Parade. And these are all American rags. And he said, "I think you do really well in Japan. So I'm going to give you my agent, Toshio Goto." And I was like, okay. And immediately I figured out how to develop film at 10, get it at 10 a.m. at this lab, get it out by 3 p.m. to Japan. And then Toshio Goto would send me tear sheets. He'd send me a big package and, they had gate folds of PIL. And it was incredible. I couldn't believe that Bob had just walked up to me and given me his agent.
Giving you a career.
Yeah, he started. He really did. And so I just kept shooting and shooting. The band started changing a lot. The club started changing a lot, where Hurrah, my favorite venue, it's so small. the specials played there, and of course XTC, which we can talk about. But the bands started, like, in some ways, PIL, The Clash, and The Jam were mega bands. They became the punk mega bands, and they started expanding into bigger venues. The Pretenders, certainly, I shot their first album, but I don't know. I just was always interested in first albums and that energy. So then I was hanging out in these much smaller clubs. The Ritz then launched, and that was around the corner the other way from my apartment on 13th Street. And a lot of it was just like, I don't have to commute. This is great. I'll just go around the corner. So, yeah. So, it morphed so fast. I mean, that was the thing, is that it went from the Clash at Motor City Roller Rink in 79, 80 to Adamant in a year. And it was just like, okay, now we're into the new Romantics phase, which I thought was ridiculous. But Adamant was great. I mean, they put on a good show. And the B-52s had become, more popular, and they also put on a great show. So I wasn't really married to English punk rock anymore. I had to evolve.
And what about artistically? Because you will have been learning on the job. You by the sound of it, you weren't taught to be you were at art school being taught, but when you picked up your boyfriend's camera, you were just aiming it at the stage and seeing what happened. I mean, how did your photography develop, and what do you think now makes a good rock photograph?
When I shot, I had to edit in my head because I was broke. So I had to think, okay, I've got this number of rolls of film, and I wanted a graphic approach. I wanted something that was framed off to the side, and I would wait and wait because I knew the songs. So I knew when that chorus or the apex of the song and the energy would just rise. So I'd wait for that shot. And so it was very deliberate. I didn't feel like there was any I have to say, I looked at my slides. I edited everything. I'm very meticulous about movement, so they were always like in sequence. And I just knew which shot would sell because it would be my favorite shot. In terms of shooting, how it evolved, I just knew the moment. Like, I just waited for the moment. And you can tell photographers who wait for that moment. Yeah. I was not going to take, I had Epic ask me if I would, I drove around with Hall & Oates to a radio station. And I would, it's like, oh my God. And then I said, just go in the elevator and do something. And so they did their Daryl Hall and John Oates pose. And I was like, all right, fine, I've got something here. But the sort of serendipity of these concerts that were early, that was just, it was almost hard to get a bad shot.
I think I'm right in saying that at the point that you saw XTC, I think they'd either only just got an American contract or hadn't got one at all. So even the act of hearing this stuff, and whether or not it was true of XTC, it would have been true of some of the others. I mean, I think there was at least one radio station that specialised in UK music, so that might have made a difference to even hear it in the first place.
There was a radio station. They mixed everything from Bruce Springsteen to Squeeze. And then XTC with Nigel became a huge hit. They rotated it a lot. And so I think I just kind of picked along, and there were bands that, were hit or miss, but certainly the Beat, the Specials, XTC, Squeeze, they were emerging out of that punk scene, and they were still relevant. But I really gravitated to XTC. I thought they were funny. I thought Andy Partridge had a good sense of humor, as we all know. I just, whatever band that I liked, I shot. Whatever band I didn't like, I might take a chance on. Like, I didn't know Mink DeVille, but he played Hurrah, so I shot him. So, I was open to a lot of bands, but XTC was a good story. Hurrah was a very, very small stage. I mean, teeny tiny. It was a popular club, so there were always, crowds. And with that single that XTC had kind of exploded with in New York and probably in Britain too, I was able to get on that teeny tiny stage behind Andy. There were no rules back then. There was no security. And, I kind of tucked in. And as they were picking up the energy, I started like clam crawling closer and closer onto the stage until I was actually on the stage. I wasn't aware. And Andy looked down at me in the middle of one of the lyrics and he just said, "Would you mind moving over just a little bit?" And I looked up at him. I said, "Yes, of course. I'm so sorry." But he was so polite. It was really funny. I thought it was.
Well, it's the opposite of what you expect. Anybody, it would have been quite reasonable for anybody, whatever their temperament, just to say, "Get off my stage," wouldn't it? They could have said he could have said the opposite.
Yeah, no, there was a moment which I had a moment when I packed my cameras and left and never shot again. And that was an Adamant concert. And it was the Palladium. It was his second show. And I was in the back with an 8200 lens, which is a long lens. And I suddenly felt my camera turning. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that's really weird. And there's this huge guy with a lanyard on that says Adamant. And he's pulling my lens off my camera. And he said, "There's no shooting here." And I said, well, that's ironic because this is a band that really needs to be exposed visually. Yeah. And I'm also working for Epic CBS. Okay. So I am working for the record label. And he said, "Get out of here. You can't shoot." And I just went, you know what? This is where it started changing with Miles Copeland and you can shoot 2 songs. And I was just like, oh, this is baloney. I'm not going to do it anymore.
I just realized this afternoon, and I've just noticed I've kept this thing. This won't be able to be audio reheard, but this is a bootleg. It's called The Rhythm. And pretty sure it's the gig that you saw with XTC. It was recorded on the 16th of January. I think that's when you were there.
Yes, it was the 16th of January.
And I've had this for, 100 years. And it's a double album, and that's what you would have been listening to all of that time ago. And it's that weird time when I seem to remember it being on really thick vinyl as well. But yeah, hugely illegal, obviously. But interesting that somebody had managed to get I don't know whether it's off the desk or where they got it from, but fascinating that it exists as an artifact.
That's incredible. Yeah, that set list. That was the one thing I have to say is. The worst part of shooting was I never heard the songs.
I was wondering that, yeah.
I would take a beat if I really, really loved a song, but only for maybe 20 seconds. Or I would put my camera to my chest and know when that apex was going to happen. But it was really hard sometimes to walk out of a show and go, I really don't have any, I really have no idea.
Yeah. And when it came to XTC, they were not known for being a particular. I think actually they were dressed up a bit on that particular tour with sort of slightly. I don't know what they were. They were slightly Victorian clothes or something. But on the whole, they certainly were not on the extreme of Adam and the Ants, and they were not, and they didn't have the sort of sense of chaos that the Sex Pistols or the Public Image Limited might have brought. So was that an inconvenience for a photographer to try and make visually interesting a band that were not particularly visually interesting?
Well, I'll answer that in 2 parts. You definitely. I mean, you have a band like The Clash that embodies their music. Then you have a band that's been designed like Adamant. And then you have bands like Squeeze, XTC, I'll use those as 2 examples, which absolutely you would have to tell a story. It was always about finding a way to tell a story, even if it was one shot where Andy has an ascot on, but it was really challenging. And I also laughed when Squeeze played. Jules was cool. I got a lot of Jules. But, it has to be visually enticing in some way. The energy has to be up, I think, as a lot of bands became pop. And I hope I don't use that word in any derogatory way, but XTC was very about composing a song, and I think Squeeze also did that. I'm trying to think of some of the others. I shot The Tourists when Annie Lennox and Dave Stewart were part of that band. I shot a lot of different bands. I shot the Stiff Records. They hired me to shoot Rachel Sweet and all of the bands that were on their label at the time. And it was funny because I liked the bands, but I knew which ones were going to make it and which ones weren't.
Yeah.
Because there had to be a hook. There had to be by that time it was about a pop song.
And I suppose with XTC, that although they certainly weren't part of that new romantic thing that was about to happen, but they were, there was an energy in the performance. And I suppose that was what you would be trying to capture.
Yeah. It just was unfortunate that the stage wasn't big enough. Because that was a crusher. That was, there was nothing to climb on, and, it was really packed. So, but yeah, they had a great energy. And I think, Andy always conveyed this wonderful sort of, I don't know, he didn't take it too seriously. He took his music seriously, and we all did too, but you could tell there was a sense of lightness with him. Whereas you had this dark, deep seriousness with the Clash. You couldn't break that wall. It had to be, that way. They changed a little, but yeah, I liked XTC a lot. I really did. And I just thought as they evolved into, the Oranges and Lemons, I just thought was incredible. The production I was always really into. So Hugh Padgham, I thought that was amazing. So I became I stayed a fan for a really long time. Sure.
Yeah. And so, actually, we do need to have your West Coast anecdote about your music studio. So talk about moving to the West, but also that this was the moment when MTV was starting, and it was a new thing. And I don't know whether it's worldwide, but it's currently contracting its operations, and so it feels like an era. Not really an era that I paid too much attention to, but a musical era has been packaged and started and finished. But what was it like working for MTV back in those early days in the early 80s?
Well, the way that came about was I had been working with Epic CBS, and I knew Gail Sparrow, who was their A&R person, really, great person. I liked her a lot. And I was in the elevator, and she said in her incredible, Long Island accent, she said, "Mona, I've got this new project." And she told me about MTV and if I would shoot these studio setups with VJs. And I said, absolutely not. This sounds horrible. And then I found out another friend of mine they also asked him, and he had said yes. So then I went back to them and said yes, because we were good friends. And so I was shooting the first show. The VJ set, very MTV, the logo, everything. The first interview they staged was Pete Shelley, and one of the camera guys mouthed to me, "I don't know who this is." And I was like, oh my God, I could just literally take a photo without looking through the viewfinder. They just wanted I don't know what they wanted. But over time, and I'll try and keep it short, I had started out as a graphic designer at Parsons and, had a double major. But I saw how it was a culture. It was really the first social media company. And it was going to destroy music. But I also saw that it was going to be a driver of, that people could see bands from around the world and be part of Culture Club, And in some ways, it did become a little bit political because it opened up doors for a lot of kids to see Boy George, dressing up drag and all that kind of stuff. So I also, once again, I felt like it was a movement and it was the beginning. And I went back to University of Michigan for a year in their graphic design department, and I just honed my portfolio, and I went back, and Fred Seibert was in the creative service department, which was non-existent at the time, and said, yeah, we're going to hire you if you'd like. We know who you are. And they did. Mm-hmm. So we were part of a 9-person creative services department, and we just cranked out so much promotional material and posters and T-shirts. I was a T-shirt queen. And Nickelodeon, that literally they threw a folder on my desk and said, we're starting a new channel. And I said, what is it? Oh, it's a kids channel. I was like, okay, that'll be interesting. So, U2 was a big, of course, Duran Duran, Pat Benatar. One day I just said to one of the programmers, I said, if you do not get Michael Jackson across the street onto this rotation, this thing's going to die, because it's just one constant stream of, again, non-diverse bands. Mm-hmm. And I certainly don't take any responsibility for saying that, but I did say it.
Yeah.
I think I said it to Tom Freston, and I just said, you've got to expand. So.
And then your Ocean Way story?
I'd always had a sports background, and it had always woven through all the music. And so when I moved to Los Angeles, Santa Monica, I was riding with a whole group of people, mostly guys, and we had this sort of headquarter house on Ocean Way, and that's like overlooking the ocean, and just kind of a little bungalow with a guest house in the back. So one day after a ride, Pat Darren, who owned the house, he said, gosh, could you guys help me move some musical equipment out, like speakers and PAs? It's been sitting there and getting dusty forever. And I asked him, I said, why do you have that? And he said, oh, it was a studio at one point, and the Eagles and all these other, bands of that era had recorded there. And I was like, what? And then I looked at the sign, and it was Ocean Way. It was the first Ocean Way Studios. So that was, oh my God, I couldn't believe it, because of course I was a huge, Oranges and Lemons and Hugh Badgett, I mentioned him before, and so many bands were being produced at the big Ocean Way Studios. And that was like, I'm taking like speakers out,
taking history out.
What?
Picking up.
Put them on the corner, just put them on the curb. I'm like, oh my God. So that was a moment.
Yeah. You self-produced your book, Punk and Rock Photography in the 80s, and sold a small number of copies, I think a limited edition of it. Are you still committed to giving it a wider release?
At the end of the day, the book will come out when it comes out, but there's so much editing and so much retouching, because these are slides that have been scanned. And, it will come out, but I also can't commit to the exact date. But when it comes out, it will be a published book, and I will certainly give you a copy.
Very good. And in the meantime, I'll put a link to your website on, in the podcast blurb and stuff. But if people want to see or even to buy your XTC prints, I don't think they're actually on the website at the moment. Would that be possible?
Oh, yeah. After this, I'm going to make sure that they're going to be available. I'll try to get them up rather quickly. And you can also reach me directly. There is a website at the bottom, but it's kathhiraga@gmail.com. And I've been selling prints just with people reaching out to me directly or DMing me on Facebook. So by all means, I'm always happy to chat and get photos in their hands.
Brilliant. Well, there's a plug for you if ever there was one. But thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
I'll hit you straight there. Well, it's been lovely to talk to you. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much for doing that.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been really fun.
What do you call that noise?
Thank you very much, Tom, for talking to us. It's great to meet you, not least because I am a huge Scritti Politti fan. So to be in the presence of the person who came up with that drum pattern on Sweetest Girl is a privilege to be with you. And I'm intrigued to talk about your background, going to Leeds and setting up Scritti Politti, and then the kind of cultural world that was musical world, the political world that was going on in the late 70s. So you went to Leeds Polytechnic at a time when various Leeds art colleges and university, whatever, were all, by the sound of it, very creative, not just for creating visual art, but for creating musical art. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is fair to say, because there was Scritti Politti, there was Mark Armand, and there was the Gang of Four and the Mekons all around the same time, all forming. And we all used to drink, but there was a pub in between Polytechnic on one side of the motorways, they called Leeds the motorway city of the 70s those times. And it was all, hey, aren't we modern? We've got motorways in kind of troughs going through the city, which socially and community-wise was an absolute disaster, but, it looked like something off a sci-fi book cover. But in between those, just at the corner of one of those troughs in the road that separated the university from the Polytechnic was a pub called the Fenton. And we all used to go to the Fenton. And I was invited to Leeds maybe 5 years ago to be part of something there was a magazine called The City or something like that, City of Leeds. And they wanted to interview me about those times. And they said, it must have been amazing. You all must have been, swapping ideas and, just really creating this whole scene together. And to which my answer, which was a bit disappointing for them, was no, the Gang of Four used to sit over there and we might brush up against each other at the bar, but it would be fairly surly. The Mekons would be over there just having fun. Mark Armand would be keeping himself to himself over there. And at the time, he had a kind of golden ringlet hairdo, a bit like Harpo Marx. And he just used to paint pictures of himself as a clown. So it couldn't have been more different from this interviewer's fantasy of us being this melting pot of collaboration and swapping ideas, like the Surrealists or Dada.
Well,
or
maybe it was the same for the Surrealists. Maybe they were all ignoring each other in the pub.
maybe it was. Maybe all those photographs were photoshopped afterwards of them in the cafe. But and of course we did have we had a bit of a relationship with the Gang of Four because we were all we're all leftists, we're all left wing, and so were they. And anyway, that's in answer to your, it was a creative time. It certainly was. And we just thought we could try anything.
I mean, one reason I'm interested in asking about the scene is in XTC terms. If you're coming from Swindon, where, there isn't a scene really, I think one of the reasons that XTC developed as they did was because they were sort of in isolation. They weren't all hanging around in Camden or, sharing drinks with the Clash or whatever. And I'm wondering about the thing about a scene is you didn't necessarily have to be friends with those people, but you knew that they were there and maybe you were keeping an eye on them and you were listening to what they were doing and you were either wanting to do the opposite or be inspired by them. Is that true to say?
That is true to say. And XTC stood out because partly their musicality was so obvious, obviously different. They could really play. And it seemed obvious to us that they had. It's almost like they'd developed in a cave, and they'd come out, developed all on their own for years and years. And here's this scene, like you said, at Rochester Castle. They can get on stage and be seen to be part of this new scene, but actually, they didn't appear to be singing about the same things. They didn't appear to be acting in any way that was influenced by anything in the music press. They were totally unique, but I think they just about kind of joined in energetically, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way at all. I mean, they were brilliant. They were absolutely brilliant, but obviously not created by the punk scene, or not. I mean, if I'm to define them, I would say it was like watching Andy Partridge's mind on stage, and a mind that had been thinking about this for years, if not decades, and now it had a platform, a stage to get on, where bookers would go, "All right, yeah, you sound a bit like the Buzzcocks or something." Not that they, not that they sounded like the Buzzcocks, but they had that same energy and the same kind of dedication to a chorus, that the Buzzcocks had, and so they found a place to fit in. But I mean, we had the utmost respect for them. We went to see them several times, I think, just to kind of bask in the, that kind of that high energy, kind of musical genius. I mean, Andy Partridge is complete genius, I think, and it made me feel sad when I heard later that they could have made it, but he couldn't hack it on stage. It was, I mean,
yeah, and well, actually, even I've got in front of me at the moment a tour schedule from 1977, and I've done a search for Rochester Castle. Even in that one venue, they played like 9 times, 9 or 10 times in 1977, and there's millions of other gigs in between. Basically, between say 77 and 82, they were 3/4 of the year they were on the road. It was just so grueling. It's not at all surprising anybody would collapse under that sort of strain. It is crazy.
Well, they must have sold a lot of beer, because I'm sure venues were delighted to have them, because you couldn't leave. You couldn't say, I've already seen this number. What are they going to do now? It's like they were. I don't want to put it all on Andy, because the rest of the band obviously contributed, but he was just this magnet. You didn't want to leave. It was like, why would you? Why would you go out and get on a night bus? When you could be here watching one more number.
Rochester Castle. It was in Stoke Newington in
North London.
In London. What was the venue like? What did it look like?
It's a fairly dark pub. That they obviously had a band section. It looked like it'd been that way for years. They hadn't thought, all right, we'll cash in on the punk movement. Looking for, it was easy, it was cheap, go and do it type stages. I think a proper stage, probably only 2 or 3 feet high, but so we could be standing right next to the band, just looking up at them a bit. The sound was good. Now, whether that was just the band's sound or whether the Rochester Castle spent some money on a PA, you could hear everything. It wasn't like, I wish I could hear the words, which was handy in that case, because hearing the words is very important.
Yeah, and you would actually go as a band then, or like all of Scritti Politti together?
Yeah, we would all get, with the whole entourage, we'd all get on the bus from Camden. I mean, I'd say Green was the instigator of all of this. We talk about being a collective, making collective decisions, but Green was certainly the leader of the collective.
He was the first among equals. But it intrigues me as well, because I happen to be a Scritti Politti fan, but there is by no means in my head there isn't a correlation between XTC and Scritti Politti. The 2 bands I happen to like, but it's never occurred to me until I noticed that you've been going to those gigs that you. I maybe you do, but I don't hear any influence of XTC on Scritti. But is it perhaps it's about a question of attitude, a belief in melody, a willingness to go in different directions, a sort of abstract influence?
And the first thing that occurs to me is musicianship. They were really good musicians.
Yeah.
And we were just starting out. So there was no way. I mean, I couldn't even play the drums at that speed if you give me $1,000. It was just impossible. So but what they represented was raw. Well, it was weird. It was a kind of raw but intelligent energy It was like, we're doing this for a reason, even if you don't know what the reason is. You know, we have to do it this way, and so I think we had that in common. And certainly, you know, Green talked to Andy sometimes because he started to recognise, oh, you lot are here again. So they would chat, and he had that kind of we're brothers together in this sort of, and he was very reverent of Andy, I have to say, because we hadn't been on stage that much at that time, and there was this band just tearing it up, you know, really, and so like I say, so riveting. So
if you listen to bootlegs or whatever, there was no time. There was like a bar between one song finishing and the next up. It was relentless. It was incredible.
Yeah. I was just going to say that we, you know, Jeff Travis at Rough Trade, he'd see us at the Electric Ballroom or something, and they'd say, "You lot, come on, get it together. There's so much tuning up in between numbers. There's so much. I just pulled my guitar lead out by accident." He said, "Just stop doing that." And we thought, oh, it's us being genuine on stage. But to Jeff, he just said, no, it's annoying. You lose the energy of the audience. He said, I can feel it. And so there's a story that I tell in that Scritti group, which is true, that I thought, right, it's up to me. I've really got to pull this together. I've got to count this in, whether we're ready or not. And someone asked me why, at the end of songs, when we're performing them, even though my head had been nodding in time with the song, it changed towards the end of each song. And they said, well, do I know what happens then? You know, someone who's a drummer, I guess. Said, do you just lose concentration? And I said, no, I'm already counting in the next song, and I'm getting the tempo right in my head when I'm finishing this one off. So we tried to kind of mimic that XTC. You know, we got it down. Whereas, as you say, it might have been 2 seconds for them. I think maybe we got it down to 30 seconds from 2 minutes, but no way were we going to be as slick as they were.
Yeah, because sometimes, like, the whole mood, like one song can have a completely different mood from the previous song.
Yeah.
And everybody's just, every one of the band members is suddenly switching into this different thing.
Yeah, and you got it. And the thing is, if you take the mood from the previous song and that was upbeat, and you think, oh, everybody loves that, and you just count it in too fast. There were times in the early gigs when I just counted in too fast, and the others would look at me and go, what the fuck are you doing? We can't play it. Because now you've committed us to 3 minutes of playing this song too fast. So I had to learn fairly quickly the responsibility of the drummer, and I took it on. You know, I quite enjoyed it, actually, once I understood. Or sometimes Green would just start, you know, I would take visual cues from his arm, because the foldback in those days was terrible. The onstage sound was terrible around London. They might put some money into the sound going out to the crowd. So it was as much a visual act as it was a musical one for us. And whatever click I did to count this in, Green might just start at different speeds. So I just watch his right arm. I'd say, that's all right. But full in with that. I mean, it was chaos. I remember now. I mean, nobody would put up with it. I think now they all got little earpieces and stuff so they can hear each other.
Were you at that, what isn't as famous as other Sex Pistols gigs, but was significant in Leeds? Were you at that Sex Pistols gig?
I didn't go to that. Green did. He came back just gobsmacked. Not musically, but he said energetically, this is just mad.
Because, well, that's the interesting thing. I think that a lot of the things that you have already been talking about is the importance of punk and the importance of the Sex Pistols seems to me to be not musically necessarily, but you then have permission to be who you wanted to be. And if you think of the bands you've already mentioned, Mark Almond, Gang of Four, Scritti Politti, they didn't sound like each other, and you could also include XTC in this. But they sounded like themselves. They sounded like they had permission to go in their own direction.
Yeah, I mean, permission's been a big theme through my life, being a shy kid. I was really shy at school, and now I'm on stage in front of 200 people at a corporate team building event, and I'm giving them permission to play drums or sing in harmony, and people say, "How do you do that?" And I kind of burned through it. I burned through my embarrassment or shyness, but it was. I mean, in answer to your question about that time, I think permission. It was a value. I don't know if permission's a value. It might be courage. It's the value beneath it, but it's like, if you got an idea, whether you're concerned about it, whether you think you're going to be judged for it, whether you're personally anxious and it's not the sort of thing you do, just go and do it anyway. Because it does give other people permission. And like I with the songs that we made up on stage, some of them worked, some of them sounded like singles, they were so good. Some of them just fell apart because we couldn't hear each other very well, or what we played didn't quite gel. But the applause we got was equal to the ones that fell apart to the ones that sounded polished, because we weren't getting applauded for musical dexterity, or we were getting applauded for courage and that permission you're talking about. We gave people more permission by falling apart on stage and staying on stage as a result. Not going, all right, it's a fair cop up there. We'll be back in a couple of years. We stayed on stage and said, right, here's another one. Let's see if this one works. Because we alternated. Song they knew, make one up. Song they knew, make one up. And do you know what? It's coming to me now. I think part of the reason we did that is because we didn't have a full set of songs. We got on stage too early, in a way, because our first gig at the Acklam Hall, we only had 3 songs. We only played 3 songs. And Brad, who runs Straight No Chaser, you probably know Straight No Chaser. He drove us there in a hired van, I think. And he said, go on, they love you, get back on. We said, we haven't got any more songs. And he said, well, just play one again. I think we may have played Skank Block Bologna again. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, that was what we're advised to do, just play them again. So we said, all right, we've got a set, 45 minutes, we better make some songs up.
The other thing about art school, I found it would be interesting to have your perspective on this. XTC frequently got accused, and I use the word accused quite consciously, of being an art school band, but they weren't. I mean, Andy is actually a very talented visual and creative visual artist, but he wasn't. He went to art college, but like to be a signwriter, not to be a sort of not like going to Leeds. So they weren't, and the others didn't at all. So they were not. They're not. They're a group of working class lads from Swindon who got a band together. But because they were a bit more imaginative, because they were going down their own route, whatever, the label of art school put them in the same bracket as, I don't know, Talking Heads, or an assumption that they were a bit sort of pretentious, I suppose, is where that accusation can be. Used to be labelled on people. Sometimes the word art school was said in a positive way. Oh, Talking Heads are good, Roxy Music are good. Here's another band that are in that ilk. But sometimes it was also conflated with clever to a sort of quite a strong anti. I mean, they're not even such an intellectual band, but there's an anti-intellectual feeling that is quite common in music reviews of that time. That I suppose somehow certain bands were considered to be more real or more, I don't know, authentic.
Yeah, I think that there were certain journalists who would have preferred it that way, but it wasn't a homogenous kind of judgment of the scene, because any like I say, anybody who'd studied history would say, I like this, but it's not going to last long, because where can you go? You can't go from 3 chords to 2 chords.
Yeah,
You can only go from 3 chords to 4 chords. E minor, the C, F, G. What can we add? Yeah, E minor. All right, sounds a bit like Bob Dylan now. I think Andy probably could have suffered from that more than most because he was so clever and so. He's just like he came from another land. You'd see punk groups sweat on stage, and they'd be, we're sweating because we're doing a lot of speed or something. But Andy sweating on stage singing was just because of the strain of playing that fast, remembering all the lyrics, and being in charge of the whole set. I mean, he was. It was like, I don't know, it was like watching a jailbreak or something, and only one person knowing the route and remembering everything that they'd planned so far, and everybody else going, "Oh yeah, we've got to dig here now," and Andy, but once you dug there, we're going over there. You could see it. Like I say, it was like watching a kind of 3D mind map of everything he'd done in the last 20 years. It was incredible.
Tom, thank you very much for this. I've loved talking to you. It's been a great chat. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you for the music.
Thank you.
What do you call that noise?
Thank you to Kathleen Hiraga and Tom Morley for the great chats, and to John Paul Vest for the music. What do you call that noise? The XTC podcast is sponsored by Burning Shed, the online home for all XTC CD, vinyl and official merchandise. Thank you for listening, and thank you to the many fabulous podcast supporters on Patreon, who include the following: Knights in Shining Karma, Terry Arnett, Kevin Burt, Lorenzo Charchi, Cale Corbett, Liam Duggan, Jamie Dunn, Alison Eales, Jeff Farris, Mike Grafe, Robert Graham, Camille Henry, Stephen Hope, Alan Hughes, Rick James, Peter Kitchen, Marek Kraus, Jesper Kumberg, Robert Lawlaw, Adrian Loon, Liz Lynch, Marie Meikle, Youssef Murrah, Amy Parkinson, Tim Parsons, Gail Ramage, Mark Reed, James Reimer, Jaime Rostamora, Michael Sutcliffe, Steve Swift, Mark Thomas, Nigel Waller, John Wedemeyer, Lucy Vivitsky and Martin Whitley. See you next time.